Hello and welcome to my studio. I'm Sasha, I'm a fashion designer and teacher. I make all my own clothes and I've started this channel to show you how to make yours too. Today I'm going to show you 3 different methods that you can use to sew in the zipper. It's important to choose the right kind of zipper for your project. So let's start with having a look at some different types of zipper and their uses. First off, a zipper can be either closed or open-ended, which means it will either stay closed at the end, like on a pair of jeans, or open at the end, like you would see on a jacket. Next, a zipper can be either regular or invisible. A regular zip has visible teeth on the front, and an invisible zip has hidden teeth on the back, which means it can be sewed into a garment as to be nearly invisible. Finally, the zip teeth can be made of either metal, plastic, or nylon. Nylon zips are flexible and you can sew through the teeth, and they're often used in lightweight garments. Metal zips are the most durable and they can also give a feel of luxury, so you often see them in jackets, handbags and trouser flies. And plastic zips come in a huge range of colours and styles, so you can often find something really unique for your project. And of course, within each type of zip, there are also different sizes. Zips are measured in 2 ways. By the width of the teeth in millimetres, which will give you the number of the zip, and by the length of the zip, which may be in either inches or centimetres. All my examples in this tutorial are closed-end zippers, and I'll be showing you methods to sew in a regular zipper, an invisible zipper, and a feature zipper with metal teeth and this really cute giant ring pull.
Method 1. Centre-lapped zipper.
This is the easiest of the 3 methods, and if you're a beginner, I would definitely advise to start with this one first. This method is called a centre-lapped zip, which means the zipper is in the centre of the seam and is partially concealed by the fabric here, which we call the lap. It works well on dresses, skirts, pouches and children's clothes, and with cottons, denims and heavier weight fabrics. But I'd advise against using it on anything really lightweight, stretch or fine fabrics such as satin or chiffon.
First, take your zipper. We'll be using a regular zipper for this method, which has both the slider and the teeth on the front. Next, take the 2 pieces of fabric you wish to add the zipper to, and start by finishing the raw edges of the fabric to avoid fraying. I'm using my serger for this, but zigzag stitch, binding or pinking shears would work just as well. Now lay your 2 pieces of fabric with the right sides together as you would sew the seam, and place the zipper into the position you want it. Make sure to leave some space above the slider for finishing. 1/8 of an inch more than your seam allowance works well. For example, I'm leaving a 1/2 inch gap here for a 3/8 seam allowance, and mark the position of the end of the zipper onto the fabric with chalk. Note that the end of the zipper is found at the end of the zipper teeth and not the end of the fabric tape. This is the lowest point that you can pull the slider down to, and there may be a metal or plastic stopper here, or an area of glue between the teeth like this. We're now going to sew together our seam with a straight stitch and a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. We're going to use a big stitch in the area where the zip will go, as we're going to be unpicking this bit later on. The chalk mark will tell us where to change back to our normal project stitch length, and we'll also add a back stitch here to secure the end of the zip. Below the chalk mark will be sewn as a regular seam. Start your line with a back stitch, then use a stitch length of 5 or the longest stitch length on your machine to sew up until you meet the chalk mark we made for the end of the zipper. At this point stop, change the stitch length to 2.5 or the regular stitch length for your project. Sew another back stitch, and then continue sewing down to the end of your seam as normal. The finished result should look like this: back stitch, big stitch, back stitch, regular stitch. Then press the seam open with your iron. Next, take a pin and place it through the chalk mark we made, so we can flip the fabric and transfer the mark to the front of the project. Now take your zipper and lay it with the teeth and slider facing down towards the seam, so the wrong side of the zipper will be facing up towards you. Make sure to position it so the teeth are lying directly over the split in the seam, and secure it into place with a pin at the top and the bottom. Next, flip the fabric to the front and secure into place with pins running the whole length of the zipper. If you place the pins at right angles to the seam like this, you can leave them in when sewing to make things a little bit easier. I'm using fork pins here to give a really firm hold, but regular pins will work too. Then take a seam ripper and unpick a small section at the top of your seam. Make sure to keep the very top of the seam closed, and you only need to unpick about 1 inch or so below that. This opening will allow us to release the slider and move it out of the way of the presser foot while we're sewing. Pull the slider down to the bottom of this opening to start. Next, change the presser foot on your machine over to a zipper foot. If you have 2 zipper feet like me, use the left-hand side foot. If you have 1 zipper foot, move your needle position over to the right so the needle falls into the small space at the right-hand side of the foot. Then starting at the top left-hand side of the zipper, sew a straight line 1/4 inch away from the split in the centre, starting with a backstitch. Stitch length should be 2.5 or the same as the rest of your project. When you get close to the slider, stop, lower your needle into the fabric, and then lift the presser foot to move the slider back up out of the way of your stitching. I'm sewing this by eye, but if you're a beginner, it's a good idea to mark the line with chalk first. When you get to the chalk mark, stop and lower your needle into the fabric. Using the needle as a pivot, turn the fabric 90 degrees clockwise to sew 1/2 inch across the bottom of the zipper. It's best to make these stitches by turning the hand wheel rather than pressing the foot pedal for more control and accuracy sewing through the teeth of the zipper. When you get to 1/4 inch away from the split on the other side, stop, lower your needle into the fabric, and pivot another 90 degrees clockwise to sew back up the other side, 1/4 inch away from the split. Keep sewing until you get close to the slider, then stop, lower your needle into the fabric, and lift the presser foot to move the slider back down out of the way of your stitching, and continue to the end of the line, finishing with a backstitch. Then finally, unpick the rest of the stitching covering the zipper. Always place the shorter side of the seam ripper with the blunt end inside the seam to avoid tearing your fabric. Take extra care at the bottom not to go through your top stitching, and at the top where the backstitch can make it more difficult to unpick. Then finally, give it a press with your iron from the front. And the finished result should look like this, and like this from the back. I've used a contrast zipper and thread so you can see the process clearly, but if you match the colour of the zip and thread closely to your project, the laps will cover the zipper more cleanly for a neat finish. Here are the pros and cons of using the lapped zipper technique. The pros. It's the easiest zip method, so great for beginners. It creates a semi-concealed finish if you match your thread and zipper colour well. It works well with cottons, denims and heavier weight fabric. And the cons. It's not the most subtle finish as you will see a flash of the zipper from certain angles. And it doesn't work well on lightweight, fine or stretch fabrics. Method 2. Invisible zipper.
I'm actually going to show you 2 methods here for putting in an invisible zipper. You can actually get a special presser foot for your machine for putting in this type of zip, which makes the process much easier. And if you're going to be using this type of zip a lot, I definitely recommend getting one. They're normally pretty inexpensive and universal models are easy to find. But if you don't have one of these presser feet to hand, you can put in an invisible zipper with a regular zipper foot. So I'm going to show you that method as well. This is a really neat type of zip finishing. You can get lightweight and heavyweight versions, and it works well on any project where you don't want to have a visible zipper.
First, take your zipper, making sure it's the invisible type. An invisible zipper will look clean on the front with just the slider toggle showing, and the teeth will be on the back. Next, pull the slider down as far as it will go, and on the back of the zipper, make a chalk mark 1 centimetre above the top of the slider on both sides of the tape. Then make a second mark just above the stopper at the end of the teeth, at the top of the zipper on both sides. Now, with the zip open, run an iron down the length of the tape to press the teeth away from the tape. This will help us get closer to the teeth when we're sewing for a more invisible finish. Next, take the fabric you want to add the zipper to and finish the raw edges at each side of the seam. I've used a serger here, but zigzag stitch, binding or pinking shears will work just as well. Measure the distance between the 2 chalk marks on your zipper, Then transfer this measurement to the right side of one of your fabric pieces, in the position you want the zipper to be placed. Make sure to always leave a gap above the start of the zipper for seam allowance and finishing at the top. Then line your second piece of fabric up and transfer the chalk marks across in the exact same position. It's really important to do this accurately to get an even finish. To help visualise the next stage, lay the two pieces of fabric together right side up, with the closed zipper right side up between them. We're now going to match and pin the left side of the zipper to the left piece of fabric. Pull down the slider and flip over the zipper so the right side of the zipper and the right side of the fabric are facing. For a 1 cm seam allowance, the edge of the tape should match to the edge of the fabric, and the zipper teeth should be facing in towards the garment or project. Pin the top and the bottom first, making sure to match the chalk marks exactly. Place the pins so the pointed end is facing up towards the top of the zipper to allow you to take them out easily when sewing. Make sure to add enough pins to keep the zipper secure throughout the process, and add a final pin at the end of the tape below the slider. Now let's have a look at how to do this with an invisible zipper foot first. Yours may look slightly different to this, but the key features will be the same. You'll see it has a single hole in the top for the needle. Then underneath there are two circular grooves separated by a divider bar. It's designed to allow the teeth of the zipper to run through one of the grooves, while the divider bar pushes them out of the way of the needle for easy and accurate sewing. It has two grooves to allow you to perform this process on both sides of the zipper. As when using this type of foot, it's always best to sew from the top of the zipper down to the bottom to get the most even finish. Attach the invisible zipper foot to your machine. Then, starting with the left-hand side of the zipper that we've just pinned, line it up so the teeth are running through the left-hand groove of the foot. Then, using a straight stitch with a back stitch to start, sew down from the top of the zipper, taking the pins out as you go, and holding the zipper teeth down flat as they go through the groove to help you sew closer to the teeth. The aim is to sew as close as possible to the zipper teeth without sewing through them for the most invisible finish. Stop when you get to your chalk mark and end with a backstitch. The finished result should look like this. Next, pull the slider up to the top, take your second piece of fabric, and lay the pieces in front of you with the two right sides facing up and the zipper in the middle. Then flip the pieces so the two right sides of the fabric are facing, and match the free edge of the zipper tape to the edge of the second piece of fabric and pin into place. Pin the top and the bottom of the zipper first, making sure to match the chalk marks exactly. Then pull down the slider and pin the rest of the zipper into place. As before, make sure to place the pins so the pointed end is facing up towards the top of the zipper, and add a final pin at the bottom below the slider. Now repeat the sewing process on your machine, this time positioning the zipper teeth to run through the right-hand groove of the foot. Make sure to start from the top of the zipper again, beginning with a backstitch, taking the pins out as you go, and push the zipper teeth down flat for the best finish. Stop when you get to the chalk mark and end with a backstitch. Now let's look at how to achieve this technique with a regular zipper foot. The process is actually exactly the same except for the positioning of the zipper against the foot on the machine. In this case, it's particularly helpful to iron the teeth of the zipper flat first, and we'll be trying to run the edge of the zipper foot as close to the teeth as possible. You should still start from the top of the zipper each time, sewing down towards the stopper with a straight stitch, starting with a backstitch. Take the pins out as you go and hold the teeth of the zipper down flat. You want to be sewing as close to the teeth as possible without going through them, or letting the zipper tape slide out of line to the left, which can be a little bit more challenging than with an invisible zipper foot, but easily done with practice. When you get to the end of the line, finish with a backstitch and repeat the process on the other side of the zipper, making sure to sew from the top to the bottom again. From here, the process is the same for either type of zipper foot. When you've attached both sides of the zipper, pull up the slider and bring the two right sides of the fabric to face. Then pin the rest of the seam together. Make sure the area just below the zipper is laying nice and flat, and move the end of the zipper out of the way. We're going to sew from the bottom of the seam up towards the end of the zipper, and our aim is to get as close to the end of this sewing point as possible. To begin with, I advise making a chalk mark in line with the bottom of the zipper stitching to give you a guide to follow. You want to sew right up to this point, or ever so slightly in front of the stitching here. To help do this, we're going to use a regular zipper foot so we can really get in close. Start from the bottom with a back stitch, using a straight stitch with a length of 2.5 or the same as the rest of your project. My seam allowance here is 1 centimetre. As you approach the chalk mark guide, hold the end of the zipper out of the way and sew as close as you can to the end of the zipper stitching. This can take a little bit of practice to get right, and if you end up with a very small gap between the points, say 1 millimetre like this, then that's perfectly okay and you'll still get a really nice finish. Finally, press the seam open underneath the zipper and then give everything a last press from the front. And the finished result will look like this. Here are the pros and cons of the invisible zipper technique. The pros. It's the most subtle of the zipper finishes, and it's perfect for projects where you don't want to have the look of an obvious zipper. If you use an invisible zipper foot, it's actually very easy to get a hang of the process, and the finish looks really neat and professional. And the cons. It can take a bit of practice to achieve a nice finish using a regular zipper foot. It doesn't work well for really heavyweight fabrics or textured surfaces such as faux fur. You can get heavyweight invisible zippers, but they can be hard to source and come in limited colourways. Method 3, feature zipper.
With this method, the zipper will be completely visible on your finished project, so it's best to use when you have a bold or interesting zipper that you want to make a feature of. You'll see this type of finishing across a broad range of items, from dresses and jackets to handbags. It can be used on some stretch items too, but I'd advise against using it on anything really lightweight.
First, take your zipper. You can use any type of zipper for this, but it works best with an interesting zip that you want to show off and make a feature of. Then take your fabric, and a great thing about this technique is that you don't need a seam to insert the zipper into, so it can be placed anywhere on your project. You'll now need a second smaller piece of fabric that we're going to use to create a facing for our zipper opening. You won't see this fabric from the outside, so it can be either the same as the main project fabric or a contrast like I'm using here. You need the facing to be about 1/2 inch bigger than the zipper tape at the sides and the bottom, and 1/2 inch up from the slider at the top. Next, finish all the raw edges of the facing except the top. I've used a serger for mine, but a zigzag stitch, binding or pinking shears will do the same thing. Fold the fabric in half on its narrower side and mark the crease with chalk on the back of the fabric. You may need to use an iron for this depending on your fabric type. Lay your zipper onto the fabric, making sure to leave a gap at the top for finishing. And we're going to mark out the opening we want for our zipper onto the facing with chalk. It needs to be just wider than the edges of the slider so it can move freely up and down, and should come to just below the stopper at the bottom. In this example, that's going to be an opening 1/2 inch wide and 6 inches long. Use your centre chalk line to mark this opening evenly down the middle of the facing. So I'm marking 1/4 inch either side of my line, 6 inches down from the top, and then joining my measurements to clearly draw out the shape of the opening to follow on the machine. Now take the larger piece of fabric from your project right side up and place the facing right side down on top of it. Use the markings you've just drawn as your guide to position the facing where you want the zipper to go and pin into place. If you place your pins at right angles to the edges of the cloth, you can leave them in on the machine for easier sewing. I'm positioning my zipper straight down the middle, but you can use this technique to place your zipper at an angle if you wish. We're now going to follow our guide markings to stitch out the opening on the machine. Using a straight stitch with a back stitch to start, sew along the guidelines you've just drawn, starting at the top right of the opening. Use a stitch length of 2.5 or the same as the rest of your project. When you get to the end of the line, lower your needle into the cloth and lift the presser foot to pivot the fabric 90 degrees to sew across the bottom. Then lower the needle and lift the foot to pivot 90 degrees again to follow the line all the way back up to the top and end with a back stitch. The finished result should look like this. Next, we're going to cut through the opening in the shape of the lines marked here in black, cutting through the centre up to about 1 centimetre away from the bottom, then carefully cutting up to the corners at a 45-degree angle. You need to be very careful here to cut close to the corner lines without cutting through the stitching. I normally cut the last bit of the corners with my small embroidery snips for precision and stop about 0.5 millimetre away from the stitch line to be safe. Now take the edges of the facing and fold them through the opening you've just cut to push it through to the other side. So the facing will now be on the reverse of your main project fabric. Use your iron to press it down into place, taking care to push the seam right up to the edge to create a neat, crisp finish. And roll the facing slightly under the outer, leaving a lip of about 1 millimetre or so to make sure the facing is not visible from the outside of your project. This is especially important if you're using a contrast facing like me, and your finished result should look like this. Now take your zipper and position it down the centre of your opening, placing a pin at the bottom first, and then continue to pin evenly all around the edges. The pins should be placed with the pointed end facing towards the top on the left-hand side and towards the bottom on the right-hand side. This will make them easier to take out when we're sewing on the machine. Next, attach a regular zipper foot to your machine and move the needle all the way to the right if needed. Starting with a back stitch, sew a line of stitching 1 millimetre or 2 away from the edge of the opening, taking the pins out as you go. Use a stitch length of 3 or higher for heavier weight fabric. When you get to the end of the line, lower your needle into the cloth and lift the presser foot so you can pivot 90 degrees clockwise to sew 1 millimetre away from the bottom edge of the opening. Then lower the needle into the cloth again and pivot another 90 degrees clockwise to sew back up the other side, finishing with a back stitch at the top. And then give everything a last press from the front with your iron. The finished result should look like this, and like this from the back. Although it's not quite as neat, you can use this technique without the facing if you're pushed for time, or you're working with a material which doesn't fray. Simply mark the zipper opening in the same way as before, but this time directly onto the back of the main project fabric. Cut into it the same way as before by mitering into the corners, and press the 3 sides of the opening to the back along the guidelines with your iron. As you can see here with my medium weight cotton, it can be very hard to stop the corners from fraying without using a facing, but it could work for something like a PVC or faux leather. Also, if you want to use this technique to put a zip into a seam, simply sew the seam together first, position the opening down the centre of the seam, then follow the same steps as before. Here are the pros and cons of the feature zipper technique. The pros. You don't need the edges of a seam for this technique, so it can be added anywhere on a project. It's great for adding interest and showing off a unique zipper, and it can be used on really heavyweight fabrics and leather. And the cons. It's not the best option for lightweight fabrics as it can weigh down and distort them. And it won't work for every project as the result is deliberately visible, which isn't always wanted.
So which method did you like best, and did you find something that works for your project? Let me know in the comments. I've taught sewing and pattern cutting in real life for many years, but I'm still really new to creating this kind of video content. So if you have any feedback at all or any videos you'd love to see next, then please do let me know as well. I've got loads more sewing and fashion videos coming for you over the next few months. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit like and consider subscribing to my new channel if you'd like to see more. And you can also find more of my sewing content on TikTok and Instagram at Sasha__Starlight. But for now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have loads of fun putting zippers into all your sewing projects, and I'll see you next time.